Welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Abraham Lincoln said, "You can fool all the people some of the time. Some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time." The United States of America is in a crisis. Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. And it's not just because of the President of the United States. It is also the Republican legislators in Washington who have relinquished their duty. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is the 32nd President of the United States, warned us, we must especially beware of that selfish group of men who would clip the wings of the American eagle in order to feather their own nest. We are at this juncture today where Republican legislators relinquish their duty in order to preserve their position, to curry favors, not to defend the Constitution of the United States. But what makes the situation even more critical is, unfortunately, the ignorance of the constituent. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represents the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Yes, we all are very inclined to point fingers to the individual at the top, Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States. He has his share of responsibility and there is his share of blame for the predicament. However, Donald J. Trump did not create the situation, the predicament the country is in. He exploited it and thus has exacerbated the situation. It is the Republican legislators who for decades have worked aggressively, systematically to take the country where it is today. As I often mention to many individuals, Donald Trump did not make the Republican Party what it is today. It did not make the Republican what they are today. The only sin Donald Trump has is to expose the Republican for who they really are. Our democracy is in jeopardy because of that. A few days ago, 44 senators, both Democrat, 44 former senators, both Democrat and Republican, wrote an op-ed in the form of a letter to send to the current senators in Washington and warn them about the very fact that the country is in danger. Our democracy is being eroded. Now, don't get me wrong, those 44 former senators, they also had their shares of blame, of responsibility. They were there and they contributed greatly to bringing the country to where it's at. The most troubling part of this conversation is the fact that the constituent, the Republican constituent, seem to have no understanding whatsoever as to how serious this predicament is. And the problem is complete ignorance as to what that means, that our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Yes, the expression is understood, but the essence of the problem is not. You see, individuals who have never lived outside the country, who have never been in any predicament where there was no democracy, or who were in a predicament where they were under either a dictatorship or authoritarian regime, have no understanding whatsoever as to what it means to lose that. As such, the conversation pretty much seems to be moot issue, useless at best. The warning sign that the 44 former senators have been screaming and warning the country about is nothing new. In fact, I personally have been warning the country for quite some time now. And here's a few excerpts of such. June 19, 2016, I wrote an article under the title, "Where Are the Patriots?" We were in the midst of election. There was the heat of the election. At that time, Donald Trump must have already clinched the Republican nomination. All the article that I wrote about this particular predicament can be found on the People Branch YouTube channel, on the People Branch website. I will shortly show you, put it on the screen for you to have a look and take stock of those articles. The warning were already there. It was pretty obvious, at least to me, that the very nomination of Donald Trump as the Republican nominee was a very huge warning sign for the United States of America, but more specifically, a danger to our democracy. I was at that point following Donald Trump very close, following his campaign, what he was promising to the country, and what he is. August 31st, 2016, I wrote an article, SOS, US democracy is in jeopardy. May 30th, 2016, I wrote an article, a case against Donald Trump for president. The list goes on and on. And even on November 4th, which is just a couple of days before the actual election, I wrote part 2 of that article, a case against Donald Trump for president, part 2. Again, all those articles can be found on the People Branch YouTube, on the People Branch website. That's http://peoplebranch.org. And even a day, just one day, well, actually prior to that, on December 16, 2016, which is, of course, a little bit too late because the election have already happened, I wrote the article, Traitor in the Oval Office. And every time I warned the country about Donald Trump. Now, here's a quick look at the article which is being scrolled between the selfie Donald Trump took with Vladimir Putin, and on the far left corner of the screen you can see the information for the article scrolling. And on January 19, 2017, just one day before Donald Trump took an oath of office, I published the article, Secretary of Russia is now President of the United States. So it did not really escape me that the very warning that the 44 former senators now are flagging the country for, the country has been warned over and over and over again. Is, in a sense, the first few paragraphs of this article that I wrote. I have begun a campaign to debunk Republican patriotism, claim that is, for it doesn't suffice to simply claim being a patriot. One must live that life every day, because patriotism requires sacrifice that it seems most Republicans prove they're not willing to make. As I pointed out several times here, that is on the People Branch website, if they continue to claim they're patriot, it's either they have no clue what being patriotic means, or they simply dishonest. It is really rather ironic that Republicans had spent 8 years attempting to delegitimize Obama's presidency, but seem so forgiving towards an individual who has publicly threatened U.S. democracy and jeopardized U.S. sovereignty. Donald Trump and supporters seems completely unfazed by Russia's interference into our election. Everyone is afraid to state the obvious. Donald Trump speaks much like the Secretary of Russia. While it seems that Russia's meddling into the 2016 presidential election was simply an act of foreign involvement to sway the outcome of the election to have a Russia-friendly US president, the information which has thus far been revealed to the public by US intelligence agencies leave room to speculate that, number one, Donald Trump had prior knowledge. In other words, Donald Trump was well aware of Russia meddling into the 2016 presidential election in his favor. Number two, Donald Trump colluded with Russia. And number three, Donald Trump helped Russia. Now keep in mind, that particular article was written in January of 2017. The Mueller's investigation had not even started yet. And it was already clear to me that the country was entering in a very serious predicament to have a president, to have the highest elected official, the President of the United States, the person who called the shot, the ultimate shot in the country. That individual was in bed with US number one enemy, Russia. So it is no surprise to me that today we have 44 former senators who can see the warning sign all over the place. And yet, the senators, the Republican senators, Republican congressmen in Washington are nonchalant about the whole thing. It's like business as usual. The erosion of our democracy, of course, Donald Trump has done a lot of that. He has tried as best as possible to damage our institution, the very institution which make America the envy of the world. He has tried as best as possible to quench the freedom of speech. He has called the media fake news in an attempt to make certain that his supporters do not pay any attention to the free press. But Donald Trump was not alone. He's not alone in this, in damaging our democracy. The Republican senators, the Republican congressmen, they have been lending a hand. They have been going after those institutions and try everything possible to continue the damage initiated by Donald Trump. Yes, our democracy is in serious jeopardy. It is not just the effort of Donald Trump. It is a concerted effort of the Republican Party.
Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the Fourth Branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
In last October, there was a hurricane, a very strong hurricane, category 4-5 hurricane that hit Florida. According to the weather expert, meteorologist, it was the first of its kind. It was a hurricane which was not only so strong that there was plenty of warning to residents who were going to be on the path of the hurricane. Not just in Florida, but both South Carolina and North Carolina, individuals there were warned. Governors of both of those states made a lot of preparation to make certain that individuals who live in those two states who were on the path of the hurricane took refuge so that they would not become victim of that strong hurricane. For the most part, most people heeded the warning. But as it is always the case, there were a few people who felt, the hell with the weather, with the warning, I'm gonna ride the hurricane. It is never advisable for anybody to do any such thing when one is warned about a danger approaching, right? Earthquake, volcanoes, eruption of volcanoes. Those, fortunately for us, we have the knowledge that give us a head start, that give us warning as to what's going to happen, and for us to make preparation or to escape the area. Now, individuals who decided to simply ignore the warning that hurricane was Hurricane Michael. Individuals who decided to just ignore the warning, not just for that particular hurricane, but it has happened before where warning was issued about particular devastation, natural tragedy, and some people say, you know what, I don't care, I'm not gonna pay attention. And more often than not, those people would end up paying a very heavy price, sometimes their lives. So it is never advisable for anyone to hear a warning and ignore that warning. There are only two types of people that I can think of who would simply ignore warning. Either the person is suicidal, so figured if he or she gets killed by the tragedy, nothing is lost, or the person is stupid because there is no other way of really thinking that. You're either suicidal or you're stupid. To put it in perspective, if you stand in the middle of a highway and someone, or rather, if someone tell you that you cannot stand in the middle of a highway, now that's a warning that if you ignore, chances are you will pay with your life. That's what warnings are for. Not just for you to hear them and say, oh, well, oh well. Warnings' purpose is to help the subject avoid a bad outcome. So you are warned when a hurricane is coming your way so that you can make preparation or leave the area, because it is suggested that the hurricane is going to be very damaging. And most people, again, heed the warning and usually would flee the area. What is baffling is the fact that the warning about the predicament the country is in ignored. It is ignored. That's the most baffling part. It is ignored not just by ignorant and stupid people, but also by legislators. Republican legislators simply shrug it off. And the reason it's so baffling is because legislators have a job to protect the very Constitution of the United States, to ensure integrity in our system of government. That's a major part of the job. The warning signs are all over the place. Even a blind man can see them. So the question is, why are the individuals, the elected officials whose job is to ensure that our Constitution is protected, the rule of law is followed, the integrity of our government is preserved, why are those very individuals actually shrug it off and put our democracy in jeopardy? Why? That's the question. Why? Now, it is sometimes understandable that constituents, they don't know any better. They're just fanatics who want something no matter what that is. That's why we talk about people who ignore warning. Those are the kind of individual who would simply ride the hurricane. And they will pay a price for that. But legislators, they are in that position, and that's their job to protect our system of democracy. Why in the world do they just shrug it off as if it doesn't matter to them? That particular aspect of the problem was so salient, so clear, that in 2015, for the first time, I wrote that article, SOS, US Democracy is in Jeopardy. For the first time since I have been writing, I did not just write, but I accompanied the writing with a video, because I believe it was that critical at that time to verbalize what I saw, what I think was a grave danger to our democracy. The context is, during the 2016 presidential race, Julian Assange interfered in our election. Julian Assange gave an interview and proposed to release documents that will impact our election. And the reaction of the Republican constituent, yes, do it. The Republican candidate, nominee for president, Donald Trump, yes, WikiLeaks released those documents. We want them, we need them. And they have justification for it too. But no one saw the danger of encouraging a foreign entity to meddle in our internal affairs, in our election. The impact is not just 2016, the impact will carry for several elections down the road. So I saw the warning as to how that was going to impact our democracy. And for the first time, I verbalized that problem and warned the country not to go along with that idea. I created the hashtag back off Assange. Here is, in a sense, the 3-minute video. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation about war on blacks. It is that important. Our democracy has been under attack. But it did not start with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. It started before that, since 2015. And we are looking at the damage that's done because the Republican constituent went along and thought, what a great idea. And that's why I said they either do not understand what patriotism means, or they simply don't care. No patriot would have gone along with that. Here it is. It seems that we have some difficulty with video. We're gonna play it again. Let's try it. Let's wait and see.
Hi, my name is Mike Duchenne, founder of the People Branch. For over 3 years now, I have been sharing my thoughts, my ideas, publish my comments on many political and social issues, usually in writing. Today, however, I find it absolutely necessary, extremely important, to verbalize my opinions in regards to the presidential election. See, much too much is at stake. No, it's not about Donald Trump. It's not about Hillary Clinton either. It's about Julian Assange. He's the founder of WikiLeaks. He makes it his mission to influence the outcome of the presidential elections. Some of you may welcome the idea. Others probably dread such event. Whichever side you're on, this is very troubling. Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Mr. Assange's ability to impact our elections is not an event any patriot American should look forward to. And it's not just about presidential election. It can impact congressional election as well. Put simply, Mr. Assange can run the United States of America the way he sees fit. We Americans cannot allow Assange or anybody else for that matter dictate how we run our country and who runs our country. I come to you, I need your help. I need your help to stop Mr. Assange from interfering in our election, meddling in our politics, and jeopardizing our democracy. Join the hashtag #BackOffAssange movement to stop Mr. Assange and send him back to the backwoods of Australia where he belongs. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. The fourth branch program will return in just a moment.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
War on blacks. From the number of comments that I received, I ought to talk just a tad about, put some context on this program. I will not try to respond to those who simply send insult, or those who think it is wrong and so on. But I would address just one group of individuals who make a point to say that there is no war on blacks. And those are the individuals I will address, because I sense that it's either that they did not have they did not follow this program from the beginning, and they do not really have any. They do not understand what this program is about. So I'll try to explain it, but for the other comments, I'll ignore it for the time being. I'll ignore those comments for the time being. Now, first, the title. We picked the title, War on Blacks, because we wish to bring attention to the fact that war has casualties, and blacks have had a lot of casualties. Now, we members of the society, we are more inclined to look at physical casualties, and more often we don't know the people who suffer the consequences, and we go about our business, so we don't know what that does when there is a physical casualty, how it ripples not just to the family who suffer the physical casualty, but it ripple even through a neighborhood, through a generation to come. So that's the reason that we use the expression war on blacks. And the main purpose behind the program itself is to have a venue where this type of discussion continues, because what we have noticed is the fact that more often that whenever there is a tragedy that happens, usually what that means is a black individual is gunned down, executed by a police officer on the street. And I use the word not lightly, because anyone that is riddled with bullets, unarmed individual, it's execution. Not just we in the media, they have this thing, because the media is also controlled by the individual who want to minimize the problem. So there are certain expressions they try not to use, but the action itself, that's what it is. Because if you want to be fair, how do you explain a police officer unload his gun on an unarmed individual? This is not shooting. This is not a tragedy. This is an execution. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I wanted to make that point clear. And we will use the expression that appropriate for the topic we are talking about. So, because every time a tragedy like that happen, this is the time that you hear in the news, on the media, that they talking about, oh, well, we have to talk about race relation because the problem is a race relation problem. Give it a couple of days, it's gone until the next tragedy. So we want to establish a venue, a permanent venue, to discuss those issues that presumably is a race relation issue. Then why not talk about it continuously? Because race relation issue is not solved. It's been around with us for as long as this country has been in existence, and all fairness, relatively speaking, it has gotten worse, not better. So this is the purpose of the venue, and the expression war on black is to simply say that casualties have been mounting on the black side. That's the reason. So the individuals who say there is no war on blacks, now I strongly suggest you take a look at the previous videos that are posted on the People Branch YouTube channel and take a listen of those previous videos. There are at least 5 videos of introduction, and now today it is episode 4 of this topic. So I strongly suggest you take a look, take a listen. They're long video, they're at least 1 hour. Some of them are 90 minutes long, but they will be worth your time, because this conversation is important conversation to have about race relation in America. So having said that, for individuals who simply think this is not appropriate, is gibberish and so on and so forth, it's your right to say whatever you have in mind. There is nobody that can fault you for it. But as you see in most of the places in this program, there is this mantra that we've adopted and say, be part of the solution or get out of the way. So we're not expecting everyone who listens to the program, who watches the program, to want to help to find a solution. Some, as it is in everything in life, some will simply shrug that off, some will not see any value to it, and there are those who will eventually help solve the lingering problem in the country, which is, of course, war on blacks. So stay with me. When we come back, we will continue the conversation about slave trades, which is a topic we are trying to explain in order to give some context as to where racism, discrimination, the context behind those. Those are not things that, of course, whenever you have two different groups, you will always have those type of issues. But in terms of racism, discrimination towards black, there are plenty of factors behind the lingering problem in the country. So we will come back to continue the conversation about slave trades. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. The war on blacks began a very long time ago. In fact, the very existence of the country suggests a war on blacks. Now, I made very certain in the beginning, in the introduction, to explain and outline and repeated several times that we understand that there are two groups of whites in the country. There are those who are gung-ho, adamant about keeping things the way they were. Some presidential candidate, even as late as last election 2012, you have plenty of candidates who yearn the idea of taking the country back to the way it was. And even Donald Trump actually slogan is to remind those who are racist bigots that he is the person to make that happen. Now, we understand that there is that group, and there are millions of those white individuals who feel that way. And what makes the discussion of race relation in America so difficult? It's because there are also millions of whites who do not feel that way, who are not racist, who do not discriminate. So that makes talking about race relation in America a very difficult topic. But it cannot be avoided just because of that. Because we, black, we suffer the consequences of such. There was a time when whites in general just shrug off the issue. In fact, they used to say that we exaggerate what's going on. Now, we will also talk about that aspect, the denial aspect of the problem, because there are plenty of individuals, especially whites, and you will find that ironically, those who are racist, who discriminate, are always the ones that were so eager to ignore or to reject the idea of those problems. Now, I asked the following questions to, we're going to be continuing the conversation about trade, but I wanted to make certain, maybe that's something I should do at the beginning of the program, to, again, for those who are watching this for the first time, to understand that we understand, we know, and we put that as a basis in our conversation, that there are two groups of whites: those who are racist, who discriminate, and those who are not racist, who do not discriminate. We already know that. We already talk about that. But in the conversation, it's sometimes lost when I'm talking about whites, because I do not make any distinction once I say whites. Now, slave trades. I mentioned yesterday, if you are white, if you are a white individual, and your ancestors were here before the emancipation, chances are you are part of the problem we're talking about. Yes, you don't know anything about slave trades. You may be 5th, 6th, or even 10th generation. I don't know. But the bottom line is, if you were born, you may or may not know that. But if you were born, if your great grandpa or grandma, if your ancestors were already here before the emancipation, that means slavery over. When Abraham put an end to that, put an end to this whole thing, then you are indirectly part of the problem. And the reason for that is because your ancestors were slave owners, slave masters. Yes, we know you don't have anything to do about that. You don't know anything about that. But what you carry as a white person with you, unfortunately, is the fact, if you come from that lineage, the story, the sentiment, all the baggage were passed down from one generation to the next until it gets to you. And I know that because we have the proof in the White House. Donald Trump was mostly raised by his father, and he learned the trade, that the real estate trade. He was at a very young age with his father, and we don't know what the father taught him in terms of human interaction, but we have at least one example that he got firsthand exposure from his father, how to be a racist, how to discriminate. We at least have that. At 17 years old, when his father discriminated against two black individuals were trying to rent from the business. And Donald Trump not only watched that happening, but also watched how his father was trying to defend the action that he did. So we know when something happened in your family, no matter how far back, but this kind of sentiment, this kind of behavior is passed down from one generation to the next, and you carry that with you. Now, I said that to bring forth a conversation I had with a number of people that I attended the journalism school with, were white individuals, of course, where the comment clearly tells me that they were raised in an environment where information, negative information about blacks, were passed to them, and they internalized that. As such, they living in that society, they also passing that same type of information to their children. So it is, those kind of things are not, and those type of behavior, those type of predicament that makes racism, discrimination a lingering issue in America, is not something that someone just wake up and become, but it is passed down, taught. Racism, discrimination, people are not born racist. People are not born to discriminate. They are taught that. So raised in a family, raised by parents who discriminate or are racist, then the children will grow up to have this kind of behavior towards other groups. Now, there are circumstances that may change that gradually, but in general, that's how it happened. So if your lineage was slave master, slave owners, then it is very possible that you carry with you as a white individual these type of sentiment, negative sentiments towards black. And it's second nature. You don't even realize that's the case. That's why sometimes when you hear a white person talk about certain thing and they say it and they cannot understand how can that possibly be insulting, how could that possibly be hurtful to a black individual. And the reason is, of course, because they grow up in an environment where saying those things was a natural thing. So when they're in front of a black individual, they don't see any problem saying those things. Now, I put a lot of stress on that because it is important to understand the slave trades aspect of racism and discrimination. Now, we have been following the money, and this is where it takes us. Blacks were brought into what was at that time British colony. In fact, the first place that received blacks were Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, which we mentioned also received 20 blacks. A ship from came to at that time to what was a British colony, and of course there was a shipment of product, merchandise, and blacks were one of such merchandise. And I also mentioned something that you should keep very close in the forefront of your mind. There is no such thing as good slave master. In other words, if they pass down a story to you, and that's really the other aspect of the racism and discrimination in the country, It's because the information that is passed from one generation to the other, of course, in the white community, they have the good information about great slave owners, great slave masters, and bad information about the slaves. And we will see, as we continue the process of talking about those issues, that this is also another tool within the white community to continue the discrimination and the racism aspect of race in the race relation. It is a tool that used very frequently. It's second nature. They don't really have to think about that because it's second nature. Slave trades, time during which that blacks, at that time they were called Negroes, were being sold, traded from one place to the other, from Africa to here to Europe, and of course even within the United States itself, there were also local trade where someone may purchase, just speculating here as to the numbers, someone may purchase 50 blacks, 50 Negroes, and in turn they may not have been in need of 50 Negroes, so in turn they turn around and sold 20 to somebody else, to another white individual, and they of course would make a profit. So they may have purchased it for each Negro at $5, and they turn around and sold those 20 Negroes at $7 each. Those are speculation. I'm just putting numbers into those that have nothing to do with how much they were charging for and how much they were selling for. So that's the financial aspect, that's a trade aspect. Now, when we talk about trades, slave trades, it is an expression that doesn't really convey anything except to say that blacks were sold from one place to the other, except to say that blacks were being used as merchandise, as product. It doesn't convey anything beyond that. And it seems like, oh, that was a bad time in our history. They shouldn't have done that, because today we're fighting against human trafficking, because human trafficking still happen for other reasons, of course, but still, well, actually, I would say for the same reason, because human trafficking happen. There is always a financial aspect to trafficking. Human trafficking is not exempt of that either. And during the colonial period, that was okay, because all the different parties were okay with it. There was nothing wrong with doing that. Now, human trafficking is an underground and illegal things that done. That's why it doesn't get the exposure necessary, and it doesn't get the resources necessary to crush that kind of activities, because it is just like blacks were subjected to a lot of bad treatment. Human trafficking carries that with it, because no human being wants to be subjected to this kind of situation. So they will always fight back, and fighting back meaning that they want to get out of the predicament. But those people who are involved in human trafficking, they also will push back. They will torture, beat, kill those who do not want to obey or to comply. So that's why human trafficking, whether it was then or now, is bad, period. But the part of the slave trade that I want to bring to the surface is not the aspect that you just think of, but don't think of the really horrific aspect of that. Because when we talk about that, you study Black history, you probably don't really get the grasp. Some movies that are made try to give a little bit of sense of that, and if you watch those movies and you are a human being, most likely you will feel emotional, and some people might even cry, because of course the producer will do a good enough job to convey the kind of situation, predicament that those slaves were in. So when we talk about slave trade, it's almost like a word, an expression that nobody really grasps, understand it. Now, we will, of course, try to put some visual behind it so that you can get an understanding as to the horrific aspect of that. But we're not going to try to tell the story just for the sake of telling the story, because our goal, our objective is not teaching Black history. Our objective is to talk about situations, scenarios that will help us to hone in on that war on Blacks, one, and second, to be able to show the relationship between racism, discrimination, and in the race relation here in America. Because the goal is that if we do not understand a problem, we cannot solve it, no matter what it is. If you remember when there was a breakout of Ebola, scientists were racing against the clock to find a cure. Well, that's what was published in the news. But in reality, the race was not to find a cure first, but the race was to understand the complexity of the disease, because until they understood the disease, there is no way that they can bring a cure to the market. Same thing in everything else in life. If we do not understand the cause, the roots of racism and discrimination, why do those people who actually are so gung-ho against Blacks, why are they? Now, for those who may not understand what that is, I ask the question for people who, especially a few people who have pushed back about this particular program, I ask the very question, is there discrimination in America? Do we have racists in America? And by racist, I don't mean the white nationalists, the KKK, because this is a very small group of people that advertise themselves as members of white nationalists, members of KKK. And yet, racism in the country is widespread. So we cannot put it necessarily on the white nationalists or on the KKK. Because if that were to be the case, we wouldn't have that problem so widespread in the country. And in the introduction, I give many, many examples of racism and discrimination. You don't have to go far. Put a Black individual in any environment, you don't have to blink. You will see it evolving right under your nose, because it is so widespread. Now, the problem, I don't have a problem understanding that predicament, because as I will continue with this conversation to explain how the whole thing started, or at least how it got so bad. And I will continue to do that. And once you get a sense and understanding as to where that came from, then maybe, just maybe, there will be hope that we can solve this lingering problem. But not talking about it is not one of them. So the idea of talking about it when a tragedy happened, and then 2 days later, conversation over until the next tragedy. Now, had that been on the forefront of our mind and on the public, for public consumption, maybe, just maybe, we would have done much more progress fixing that problem. But because everybody is cringing at the idea, let's not talk about discrimination. Let's not talk about racism. It will just solve itself. Well, 69 years, it's still here. So it's not going to solve itself. So we take upon ourselves to talk about it and explain the origin, the roots, and in the hope that will help also to solve that problem. But there is no doubt there is racism widespread in the United States. There is no doubt that discrimination is widespread in the United States. But nobody wants to talk about it. Now, we don't want to just talk about it. We want to show the road that where we came from, why we here, where we at. And once we have an understanding, I'm certain that we can solve that problem. So we will continue that conversation. I will show you a picture, an image of a rendering image of a slave trade. And we will continue that conversation next time, because we want to actually dwell on that picture and explain the horror in that in slave trades. And as you begin to understand it, maybe some of the white individuals who are still on the side of the racists and those who discriminate may start getting maybe an idea as to why they on the wrong side. Take a look at this rendering picture. It is a venue where blacks, Negroes were being sold. And the gentleman that you see standing on that pedestal with a baby in his hand, hanging, with whites around, bidding for that baby, for that Negro baby. We'll be right back. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. I do thank you for spending the time with me. Hope you are getting some great information that will hopefully help you get things in perspective, because those topics are very important topics. They impact a whole country. They impact generations, and we're hoping that we're making a difference. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. we will come back to continue the conversation on how much our democracy is in jeopardy, and also continue with war on blacks. And of course, we will address this picture you saw earlier about slave trade. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon or evening, whichever it happens to be. Hope to see you again. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social, political issues, and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.